Good evening. You're watching World News Tonight, live from Warsaw, and I'm Anna Kalczyńska. Donald Trump declared his readiness to defend Poland and the Baltic states in the event of a threat from Russia. And the UN Security Council will meet Monday at Estonia's request to discuss the violation of the Baltic countries' airspace by Russian fighter jets. More on that in just a moment, but first, let's take a look at the headlines. Russia targets Ukrainian heritage, systematically destroying its vital cultural sites. The Dutch want stricter anti-immigration policies. Hundreds have taken to the streets of The Hague in violent protests. She almost lost it. Instead, she secured her third title this year. Iga Swiatek wins another trophy in Seoul. NATO scrambled its German Eurofighter jets today after a Russian reconnaissance aircraft was detected flying over the Baltic Sea. In response to increasing Russian provocations, the EU is looking into more severe sanctions, whereas some leaders across the bloc, including Czech President Petr Pavel, discuss military responses. Meanwhile, US President Donald Trump is set to meet Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky this week. Randy Potts has this story.
On the sidelines of the UN General Assembly, a meeting between Zelensky and Trump is expected to take place.
I'm going to meet with a lot of the leaders at the UN. We want to probably 20. Everybody wants to meet, but I'm one person. But we're going to meet with quite a few of the leaders.
Along the front, while Ukrainians boast their successes, it is also clear that Russia is making small advances in the Donetsk and Zaporizhzhia regions. Europeans are also stepping up military spending, especially after representatives from the Pentagon told European diplomats of their plans to scale back U.S. security support for Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. As the end of summer draws near, Russia has begun provoking countries all along NATO's eastern flank, with Russian drones entering Poland and the Baltics and Russian fighter jets over NATO waters in the Baltic Sea. The European Commission is reportedly weighing tariffs on Russian oil imports via the Druzhba pipeline in a bid to reduce the bloc's reliance on Moscow's energy. As some EU leaders seek diplomatic or economic reactions, others say military responses may also be required.
I believe that at this time we must be absolutely clear that if the rules are broken, we must respond appropriately, including militarily.
Pilots of British and French fighter jets are now in Poland and say they are ready to help defend NATO territory.
QRA means quick reaction alert. It means that we are ready 24/7 to take off on demand. The demand comes from the chain of command of the NATO, and we are able, when necessary, to take off and be ready for any mission.
Even as Russian provocations increase, many experts believe the Russian military is still too occupied in Ukraine to open up a new front with NATO.
While war is raging in Ukraine, Russia is not ready physically, technically. Russia has no strength and capabilities to do a significant provocation or incursion into or test significantly NATO eastern defenses. While war is still going on.
Late on Sunday, Trump was asked if Poland or the Baltics were attacked by Russia, would he help defend them?
Yeah, I would.
For TVP World, Randy Potts.
Churches, museums, memorials, libraries. Russia has damaged or destroyed more than 500 cultural sites in Ukraine, including 150 religious sites, in more than 3 years of the war, according to United Nations cultural organization UNESCO. Apart from ravaging Ukraine's national heritage, Russian soldiers are destroying and stealing priceless cultural values. Understanding that a nation is more than just a territory, Russia deliberately targets Ukraine's culture. Sonia Agata-Biszczan reports.
This is the over 1,000 years old St. Sophia Cathedral in Kiev. In June, it was damaged by a Russian missile strike.
Over the past 3 years of war, we have found the remains of Shahed drones on our premises, but the last direct hit we had before this was during World War II. There has been nothing since, until now.
St. Sophia Cathedral is one of the 508 cultural sites in Ukraine that UNESCO has verified as damaged since the beginning of Russia's full-scale invasion. Pursuant to the 1954 Hague Convention, cultural heritage is meant to be protected during armed conflicts.
This is intentionally, without any military necessity, attacking heritage, destroying it. I mean, this whole range of destruction for me is a violation of the Hague Convention. It's a war against culture and against heritage.
Describing the damage suffered by Ukraine, the country's former Prosecutor General Andriy Kostin said that in addition to the systematic destruction of cultural heritage, Russia is committing another crime, the theft of cultural values. And the two are also dangerous in a broader sense.
When you are looting museums, taking these collections to Russia, we know that in Russia they are doing, one has to call them propaganda shows, trying to rewrite Ukrainian history, saying that there is no Ukrainian history. Ukrainian history is a part of Russian history.
Ukrainian culture is what gives Ukrainians their sense of identity. That is precisely what the Russians are trying to destroy. The first things they do in occupied territories is ban the study of Ukrainian and burn Ukrainian books. That is why it is extremely important for us to preserve Ukrainian culture and promote it, because Ukrainian culture preserves us.
On September 4th, the Ukrainian Ministry of Culture signed a memorandum to establish the Ukrainian Cultural Heritage Fund. The initiative is expected to draw international support to safeguard Ukrainian artifacts and restore damaged sites. For TVP World, I'm Sonia Gatabishchan.
The United Kingdom, Canada and Australia are the latest countries to recognize Palestine as an independent state, joining 150 nations worldwide. Commenting on this diplomatic gesture, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said that there will be no Palestinian state, as its creation is a direct threat to Israel. The announcement of the recognition of Palestinian state will be met with proper response. Hubert Kisiel has this report.
As the humanitarian crisis in Gaza grows, the United Kingdom has said that the two-state solution is the only viable step forward.
In the face of the growing horror in the Middle East, we are acting to keep alive the possibility of peace and a two-state solution. That means a safe and secure Israel alongside a viable Palestinian state. At the moment, we have neither.
Many more countries have recognized the Palestinian state since Hamas's attack against Israel and the country's subsequent campaign of retaliation. Israel's push into Gaza has prompted other countries, such as Canada and Australia, to follow in the United Kingdom's footsteps, says David Lammy, British Deputy Prime Minister.
But let's make a distinction between Hamas and the Palestinian people. And what do we say to the children of a future Palestinian state? Do we say we have to wait for the perfect conditions before we can recognize a Palestinian state? Or do we say, when we see the E1 development, the expansion plans the Israeli government now have in the West Bank, when we see the decision not to move towards a ceasefire, but instead to attack Qatar and set back that ceasefire, do we say to them, no, you cannot have that Palestinian state that is your dream? And I think that's the assessment, not just the UK, but France, Australia, Canada, Belgium are making at this time.
With the humanitarian crisis in Gaza unfolding, more and more countries seem to feel the need to recognize the Palestinian state, especially with no end to the war in sight, as Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu vowed to destroy Hamas until it is no more.
1 month ahead of elections, an anti-immigrant protest in The Hague turned violent on Saturday. 30 people were arrested and 2 officers injured as large groups of people clashed with police, with some throwing rocks and bottles, and authorities using tear gas and water cannons to disperse the crowd. The protesters demanded stricter migration policies and a clampdown on asylum seekers. The Dutch head to the polls on October 29th. Karolina Stolzmann reports.
Not even the rain could extinguish the fire of the anti-immigration protests that erupted in The Hague over the weekend.
No one at all should come to the Netherlands, and many people should just go back home.
But even some of the protesters were surprised just how quickly their originally peaceful demonstration turned violent.
This really isn't demonstrating. We just want to make our voices heard. But setting a police car on fire and throwing barriers at the police officers just sends the wrong signal. That's unacceptable. I personally don't take part in that, but I can understand that many people have pent-up anger and that some people can and want to make themselves heard in this way.
Despite the fallout from the protest, the demonstrators remain adamant.
The asylum policy is absurd. I want a house too, but everything is being given to people with residence permits. And then there are these troublemakers in the mix.
The protest was initiated by Dutch far-right groups. It comes just weeks ahead of a snap election, called due to the collapse of the government when the far-right Party for Freedom withdrew its ministers over disagreements on migration policy. Dutch politicians have no doubt who's to blame for the protests and the political unrest that led to their eruption.
Groups of hooligans from all over the country have deliberately sought confrontation with the police, using excessive force in doing so. These scum come from all over the country. The violence is coming from the extreme protesters, but a political system that increasingly uses harsh and extreme language, pits people against each other, incites them, of course fuels the idea in society that you can get away with this.
As tensions are running high, migration cements itself as a key issue in the Dutch political landscape.
People are fed up with it. Change is needed. That's the whole point. Change is needed.
At least 30 people have been arrested and 2 police officers got injured in the riots. Dutch authorities are still to review camera footage and say more arrests cannot be ruled out. For TVP World, Karolina Stolzman.
She was 2 points away from losing, but she made it. Coming from a set down to win the battle, Iga Swiatek defeated the Russian Ekaterina Alexandrova in Seoul, securing her 3rd title in 2025 and the 25th in her career. Konrad Gorliński took a closer look at this phenomenal final.
It certainly wasn't as easy as yesterday's matches, but the pride of Polish tennis, Iga Swiatek, has done it again, taking yet another ATP title this season. Iga came back from a set down at the start of her grueling 2-hour and 40-minute match against number 2 seed Ekaterina Alexandrova to take the Korea Open title 1-6, 7-6, 7-5 in Seoul on Sunday.
That was the 25th title that she got in the whole career for now, out of 30th finals that she played. But I think that today's match was the toughest one, the toughest final for sure.
She did come close to losing it all in the second set tiebreak, however. So what happened? Well, in a situation that almost never happens at this level of competition, Iga was forced to play both her quarterfinal and semifinal matches in one day, just a day before the finals match.
And she was struggling with her serve and also with her return, but then she played really, really great at tiebreaker.
It was a tough match, and I don't know how I actually pulled it off, but I'm proud of myself, and thank you for the support.
She's still a whole 3,000 points behind number 1 seed Aryna Sabalenka. That will not be easy to make up. But that's the key. This was a big psychological win for her.
I think it's gonna give her like a lot of power, a lot of like self-confidence that she actually lost in the last few months, obviously except for winning Wimbledon or Cincinnati. So I think that at the beginning of the next year, she's going to be back at number 1.
Up next will be the China Open, starting September 24th in Beijing. Sabalenka will not play in the tournament, so Iga has a chance to scoop up another 1,000 points. For TVP World, I'm Konrad Gorliński.
Sękacz, or tree cake, is a delicacy that unites Poland's eastern borderlands. Baked on a spit over and over the fire. It's a simple mix of eggs, yolks, butter, sugar and flour, but it has passionate fans across Poland. Nowhere more than in this village of Sławatycze, where the annual Sękacz festival is in full swing. Our reporter Karolina Szapland was there.
We're right on the bank of the Bug River. Behind us is the Belarusian border. Today is a very special day in the life of Swiatek village. Welcome to the Sękacz Festival. Sękacz cake, with its rings meant to resemble tree bark, has been part of ceremonies here since the Middle Ages. Today, its preparation has also become a livelihood for many local women.
When I had kids, I had no way to keep a job, so I started baking tree cakes myself. It's been 18 years at this point.
We decided to make a tree cake out of as many as 80 eggs over a wood fire. We made it with my husband, spent over 4 hours baking it.
Cakes like these used to be served mostly at weddings, and now it's standard Sunday fare, served over tea or coffee, but it wasn't so common back in the day.
Sękacz is a cake worthy of the finest tables.
At my house, we have tree cake basically every week. My 5-year-old son loves it. Tree cakes from our county have made their way onto tables of Poles nationwide, but have reached European leaders, and one was served even to Pope Francis himself.
But this festival is about more than just cake. There is a woodcutting competition.
You get penalty points for missing or making a poor split. The person with the least penalty points wins.
A bustling regional food fair. This festival will continue well into the night, a proud celebration of Podlasie culture and, of course, of that delicious tree bark cake, Sękacz. For TVP World, I'm Karolina Shapland.
Today's interception of Il-20, a reconnaissance Russian aircraft over the Baltic Sea, marks yet another incident which prompted NATO jets scrambled on their eastern flank. Last series of Russian provocations leads to a two-world and twofold approach, with calm deterrence on one hand and some more aggressive yet symmetrical reaction pushed by some EU leaders. So what exactly should be NATO's response at this point? Velina Čakarova, founder of FACE Geopolitical Consultancy, joins me now to discuss the latest. Good evening and thank you for joining.
Good evening and thank you for the invitation.
The pleasure is ours. So the Russian provocations intensify, testing NATO's resolve. What should be NATO's response at this point? How to react accordingly in order to deter Russia without, at the same time, giving Kremlin the pretext to escalate actions?
What we are observing right now is that Russia is probing the NATO member states in stages, drones into Polish and Romanian airspace, cyber and jamming attacks against Poland, now fighters over Estonia. And the message is simple, in my view. If NATO tolerates these provocations, they will continue and they will intensify. So deterrence erodes if the violation becomes routine. We know for a fact that Moscow wants to normalize risk. It wants to create new facts on the ground. It wants to stretch allied air defenses and basically measure Europe's hesitation while the war in Ukraine continues. So one possible way of responding to this blatant provocation is, for instance, to consider concrete actions beyond all the statements of being outraged and also statements of support, which we've seen from the past days. One consideration, a hypothetical consideration, of course, is to consider that deterrence works only when the rules are credible for all participants and not hypothetical. Right now, Russia is testing these rules and is showing to the world that they are not credible. Remember Turkey in 2015, after several warnings, it shot down a Russian jet. And what happened afterwards was that the violation of the Turkish airspace stopped. Moscow respected strength, not the hesitation. I know for a fact that this is now certainly a scenario. It's not decision yet, but it's a scenario that is being regarded. Now consider a second possible way of reaction. Let's assume that there will be European NATO members that will be hesitant to agree on this scenario. Then a possible way would be to consider the brief violation of the Russian airspace in a similar way of what Russia did with Estonia, to show actually reciprocity and at the same time keep the threshold of escalation.
Exactly. So, as you mentioned, the deterrence works only if both sides accept common rules. Now, the drone incursion into Poland was an attempt to sow uncertainty about NATO's reaction. Shouldn't NATO respond symmetrically? I'm not even talking about shooting down, but also perhaps to make similar moves with the drones crossing the border, or at least operating in the realms of the two countries.
Absolutely. Once again, deterrence is a behavior. It's not a press release. It's not a statement of being outraged about a certain action. It is a behavior that's an outcome of certain steps and certain actions. If Moscow keeps pushing across the line, and I can assure you that this will be the general line of action, because Russia, as I've been guest on your show and as I've been explaining for the last 3.5 years again and again, has declared war on the European Security Order on the 24th of February 2022, meaning a war by other means. Mostly, of course, including, and meanwhile, unfortunately, including the full spectrum of the hybrid forms of warfare. That means below the threshold of a kinetic war. Yet, as we are observing, now Moscow keeps pushing across the line, and NATO must move from warnings to serious consequences. Of course, calmly, lawfully, and together. So if we want to prevent the next escalation, we should stop tolerating these provocations. And one possible step, as I suggested, is to actually consider a reciprocal move, which is a step of violation of the Russian airspace with NATO military jets that doesn't seek a provocation of a military attack, but is showing strength. And at the same time, is showing actually what a reciprocal reaction of NATO would be to further violations of NATO airspace, which I can assure you will continue if we stick to the press releases.
Exactly. The Russians, in the meantime, deny any violation. Is this message, which is unacceptable for accepting the facts, right? Which is designed also for the internal audience, for the Russians, I presume. How to tackle with such a situation, and how to respond to such a message of blatant lies?
You know for a fact that it is very hard to tackle fake statements or fake news with the truth. Just by presenting the truth, the way how things actually took place, it's not sufficient. First and foremost, as you rightfully pointed out, this plausible deniability, which was more or less the package of different hybrid forms of Russian warfare against individual European member states of NATO, in my view, has crossed the red line. It's no longer about a plausible deniability because it's happening blatantly in front of our eyes, and we can no longer neglect this reality. So I don't even think that, Russia is saying, of course, what it needs to say in this situation. But in reality, I think that Russia wants the world to see how vulnerable we are, and it wants actually to show how little credibility our deterrence concept within NATO really has, because it started already with the first drone intrusions and attacks on Poland. When we activated Article 4, there was a reluctance to even think of activating Article 5. And there we are right now, where we are again trying to come up with some sort of collective action and response to a blatant violation of our airspace, which goes beyond actually our, the least minimum of what the deterrence concept will need to be basically activated in terms of reciprocity and in terms of reaction. So again, just any resolution, and I do welcome resolutions, and I do welcome the press releases, but they don't have any serious impact on the actions of an enemy or competitor who will just increase the temperature of escalation and will just continue testing our reaction to that.
In response to increasing Russian provocations, the EU is looking into more severe sanctions. Some of the leaders push for, among whom the Czech President, for that matter, Petr Pavel, push for military responses. Do you think that the Russians understand this sort of a dialogue within EU as well as a weakness, or quite the contrary? They just see it as our internal discussion?
They are certainly carefully observing how these formats of dialogue and coordination are happening and what kind of outcome comes out of these dialogues. So it's very important to come up with not just a coherent plan, but to move beyond the plans with the concrete action, which would be to start, for instance, for NATO to start, and that mostly refers currently to the European NATO members, because we also saw quite of a weak reaction on behalf of our strategic partner, United States, in the hindsight. Now, NATO must actually start with the warnings, but also the interception and the deconfliction channels, and they are happening in a parallel to what I already suggested as a concrete reciprocal move. So I'm not saying that we should go full on an escalatory path, because once again, we know for a fact that Russia will use it to create the necessary optics of its narrative, which it has been spreading for the last 3.5 years, that this is a NATO-Russia conflict and that the NATO actually is waging a war against Russia, and Russia had to react to that. So that is just part of the whole hybrid warfare. And of course, these kind of provocations, they hide this component where Russia wants us to show some muscle, military muscle, so that they can use it also against us. But that should not scare us off, because we are already first and foremost, we are in uncharted waters. So right now, the way we will react will determine the actions and the escalatory path for the future. Every misstep now is going to multiply in the future if we take the wrong decision. So we have to show a deterrence now and not start doing any plans and statements. That's the most dangerous track that I actually recommend against.
Exactly, and ambiguity. How do you read the American approach? According to Reuters, Washington halts its military help for the countries bordering with Russia. On the other hand, today, Trump confirmed that he would help Poland and the Baltic states, just in case, to defend themselves. So how do you read it?
So first and foremost, there is a kind of a bifurcation in the American reaction to the old continent and how the old continent is currently more or less on its own in not just trying to support Ukraine, but also trying to come up with any adequate approach to this Russian hybrid warfare on the security order. So these are two different things. And the bifurcation stems from the fact that this American leadership still sees series of significant and important allies in Europe, Now, the problem stems from the fact that it doesn't see the whole as its credible and strategic ally. And by the whole, of course, I mean the European Union. We know for a fact how Trump looks at supra-organizations. We do not need to discuss that. His stance did not change at all. But the problem is he doesn't see the whole as a credible strategic ally. We saw how he dealt with the European Union during the negotiations on the tariffs. Yet, for instance, when it comes to countries like Poland, like Romania, like the Baltic states, like the new Nordic NATO members, and then, of course, the ongoing talks with Turkey, with the second largest NATO army. So there are a lot of positive signals, and we should be very mindful of the fact that individually, when it comes to these bilateral tracks, there is a lot of positive. Still a lot of positive.
Good to hear that. I'm afraid our time's up. Thank you so much, Velina Chakarova, founder of the FACE Geopolitical Consultancy, for joining us this evening, and hope to see you soon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for watching World News Tonight. Please stay tuned to TVP World for more to come.